reach heaven's joys, O bright and sun. Heart of my heart, whatever befall, still be my vision, O ruler.
Hello, welcome back to our study of how to interpret the Bible. Last time we talked about how God authorizes things. We made some observations that really come out of everyday experience. When someone gives a specific command, that eliminates all other possibilities. On the other hand, when someone gives a general command, that leaves open all the possibilities. Thus, there's a certain sense of the word in which we could say that silence can be prohibitive on the one hand, or it can be permissive. Which one it is depends on what type of command that we are dealing with. Thus, when mom specifies walk to the small child, that closes down all the other possibilities. The child cannot run or skip or hop or any other type of means of getting wherever they're going. But on the other hand, when the mother says, go get you a bite to eat, you're left open with all the possibilities, at least for the teenage boy, all the possibilities that are still available because he's consumed everything else. But it's a general command, and it leaves open whatever is available. He can have peanut butter and jelly if they have it. He can have hot dogs. He can have hamburger, just whatever's available. He can have it because it's a generic command. God authorizes in much the same way, sometimes giving specifics like the kind of fire he wanted. Nadab and Abihu violated that, and they died for it. Other times, he gives a generic command like go, and the means of going is determined by us. We get to choose. As long as it's legal, we can do it. Now, today we want to go forward with something that in a certain sense is a subset of what we were talking about last week. And that is, we want to talk about expedience and when they're acceptable and truly expedient, or when they are not, when they're disallowed because they are not really expedient. In order to understand this, I want to read a brief quote that comes from a debate some years ago, in which a man by the name of Burton Barber made this statement: I believe with all my heart, as much as that Mr. Wallace sits here, that he has not one single passage to authorize him in the use of a tuning fork or the songbook or anything else he might want to bring forth. Now, Barber believed that mechanical instruments of music were just aids to worship, that they were comparable, therefore, to tuning forks, songbooks, pitch pipes, and other things of that nature. Now, you understand the position that he's taking. What we have to determine is he correct or not? We've already seen that when God gives a specific instruction in His Word, the only act that is authorized is the one that is specified in the command. Silence, as to other actions, prohibits their use. In contrast, we've also seen that a general command is silent in regards to any choice, and thereby permitting us to use any method that brings about the fulfillment of the Father's will. Now we need to see that methods or means that expedite the fulfillment are included within the authority of the command. Also, methods or means which are coordinate with God's specific requirements are additions, therefore violations to the Almighty's instruction. The word expedient is used of either an aid or a method to signify that which is advantageous, sensible, or wise. Franklin Camp, in a lecture entitled Freedom Applied, Faith and Expediency, said this: Matters of faith do not change from generation to generation, nor do they vary among congregations. Methods of expediting a general command may change from one generation to another. Now let me give you a quick example before we go any further with Camp's thoughts. In days gone by, it was common to use a songbook so that everyone would have the same song. Now, though books are present in many buildings, many times the songs are projected onto a screen or onto the wall. Either one is merely expediting the singing. It's helping all of us, so to speak, be on the same page, be using the same words, be using the same music. So there's a case where the method or the means of expediting the command has changed, but the command is still being carried out. Camp went on to say this: if this were not true, the church would be bound to the methods that were used in the first century and would be unable to use the tools of the present day in carrying out its work. Unless various methods in carrying out general commands in the Scriptures may be used, the church would be hindered in its work of preaching the gospel. Peter never spoke on the radio. Peter never delivered a televised address. Would it be wrong for us to use them? Of course not. These things are available to us. They were not available to Peter. The use of television, like we're doing today, does not change the message. By the way, it makes the message neither right nor wrong. By television, I could deliver a wrong message. Through television, I could deliver a right message. The television, as the delivery vehicle, is not the problem. It's the nature of the message that is the problem. If a father tells his son to cut the grass, the son could choose various ways to cut the grass. He might go in the house and get his mother's scissors and go out and begin cutting the grass. I don't think that's going to be a very speedy way to do it. In fact, he may be cutting the grass the rest of his life, because when he gets finished on one side, he's going to have to go back and start on the other. It will have already grown up. He also, of course, could use a lawnmower. Now, which one expedites carrying out the command? Obviously, both do in a sense, but the lawnmower expedites it more so than the scissors do. Christians are commanded to partake of the Lord's Supper. Eating the Lord's Supper requires both bread and the fruit of the vine. Partaking of the bread and of the fruit of the vine requires containers, some means of conveyance to pass it on from one person to another. In other words, to expedite the situation. Now, what kind of container will we use? Will we use, for example, glass containers for the fruit of the vine? Or will we use plastic containers? Will we use little bottles or big bottles? Will we use pitchers? What means will we use? Well, any of those would be all right. None of them is unlawful in God's sight. It's just evident that the type of container can expedite the carrying out of the command. And so we get to choose the container. Similarly, usually, bread is placed on a plate to be passed from one to another. That just expedites it. And to be frank, it makes it a little more palatable. I don't want everyone with their hands handling the bread that I'm going to break off and eat. But notice, an expedient is needed to partake of the Lord's Supper. Franklin Camp did caution that those looking for expedience ought to remember a few things. First of all, a matter of expediency or a method cannot change or alter the authorized act. One cannot scripturally expedite an unauthorized practice. He went on to illustrate with the case of sprinkling. One could not contend for an expedient way to sprinkle because the act itself is not authorized. Well, Camp knows what most people know that are aware of church history, that the reason for the introduction of sprinkling and pouring was because some people were incapacitated, it seemed, and they were not easy subjects of baptism. Now, could you baptize a paraplegic? Absolutely. It's not a problem. It may take 4 men, each holding the corners of a sheet, to carry him down in and lower him into the water and then lift him up. But yes, he can be baptized. Is it the easy thing to do? No. But baptizing is all that God has commanded. That's the only thing we can expedite. We can't speed up baptism, expedite it, by using sprinkling, because sprinkling is not authorized within the command to baptize. An expedient must always be subordinate to the act that it expedites. When something is used with an authorized act that is coordinate with or equal to the authorized act, it is an addition, not an expedient. Now let's see if we can see this. The Passover instructions, as recorded in Exodus chapter 12, verse 5, indicate that a man was to kill a lamb. But what if a man said, well, I don't really like lamb. I prefer pork. Would it be all right for him to substitute a pig for the lamb? Well, that's pretty obvious. The pig is unclean, the lamb is clean. So he certainly could not substitute. But let's take something different. God said, kill a lamb, one for each household, based on the size of the household. Could a man in place of the lamb say, well, I really prefer oxen meat, so I'm going to kill an oxen? Well, again, the answer is no. He is not expediting the command by using something that God did not place within the command. In this case, the so-called expedient of either pork or oxen would be unacceptable because it would cause one to violate the law that had been issued. Now, let's talk about singing, since that's what Mr. Barber specifically was talking about. I can observe, and you can too, that in order to sing, we need a pitch. That's never more evident than when one of us, like myself, might be tone deaf and incapable of getting a good pitch. Let that man lead singing and you generally are going to have a mess. It's going to sound terrible. Not that it has to sound perfect, but certainly it ought to be the best that we can offer. And a tone deaf man can't help us with that. How are we going to get the pitch? Well, we could get the pitch with a tuning fork. We might get the pitch with a pitch pipe. Either one of those will give us the appropriate tone that we need to start the song. By the way, now they have apps for phones that will also give you the pitch. So that would be all right too. So long as they know when to be quiet. The tuning fork doesn't need to keep playing in the midst of the singing. The pitch pipe doesn't need to keep playing in the midst of the singing. The man who uses the app on his phone doesn't need to keep playing the sound while the singing is going on. But any means can be used to get the pitch as long as that means does not follow through and get involved in the singing. What about songbooks or PowerPoints? They just give every worshiper the song that we are singing. It's left up to the song leader and the elders to decide the tempo, the pitch, the number of songs, the number of verses. These things are all left open to us. But the important thing is God has given us a direction. He wants us to sing. This will require us to have pitch, and it will require us to have songs. How we get the pitch and how we get the songs is not specified. It's left open to our decision. Now, let's observe whether or not it is possible for us to use a mechanical instrument of music in our worship to God. And what I want to do here is take the two passages that most readily deal with this idea of singing and see if they also include the concept of an instrument of music. So what we're going to do now is run a parallel. And we're going to use two passages. We've got Ephesians chapter 5, verse 19, and we have Colossians chapter 3, verse 16. Now notice both of these passages, and what we're going to do is read and break them down. Let's look first at Ephesians 5:19. As the Apostle Paul writes to them, he says, speaking to one another. And so we have speaking. And then we have to one another. Then he says in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. Singing and making melody where? Making melody in your hearts. And then to the Lord. That's Ephesians 5, verse 19. And by the way, that's the passage that is most often abused. It is the one where people try to insert the instrument. And they're doing that really by going to this word that is translated making melody. And it includes the idea of plucking, but it doesn't say what to pluck. And we'll observe that better by looking at the parallel passage. Let's go to Colossians chapter 3 and verse 16. The Apostle Paul there, writing to another church, not Ephesus, but now Colossae. And as he writes to them, he says, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing. So here we have teaching and admonishing. Admonishing. Here, speaking. Here, teaching and admonishing. Basically, the same idea. And then he goes on. What does he say next? Teaching and admonishing one another. How? By what means? In psalms. And by the way, that's one another. One another. Excuse me. In psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. Singing with grace in your hearts. And then last, to the Lord. Can you see that these two commands are parallel? Well, obviously we can. Speaking, teaching, and admonishing, basically the same thing. To one another, one another. In psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. In psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. Singing, singing, and making melody in your hearts. With grace in your hearts. To the Lord, to the Lord. So this making melody, what does it mean? It means with grace in your hearts. In other words, God wants us in our singing, quite clearly, to be sure that we incorporate not just truthful words, which would be found in the psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, But in addition to that, He wants us to include our hearts. Our hearts need to be involved in what we are doing. And so now we begin to understand that this making melody is simply pointing to the idea of pluck your heartstrings. When you sing, pluck your heartstrings. Be sure that you're not just singing the truth, but that you're involving your heart in the truth. Once we come to that understanding, then all of a sudden we can begin to appreciate what is going on here. God has authorized us to sing. That requires songs. It requires a pitch. How we get the songs, how we get the pitch is up to us individually in the various congregations. But adding the instrument, the mechanical instrument of music, playing it with our singing is not authorized. The reason it is not authorized is because God has specifically said, sing and pluck your heart, have grace in your heart, and direct it to me. That's a very, very important understanding. Now, in the time that remains today, I want us to look at the idea of law and incidentals. We need to appreciate the fact that every law really carries with it specific ideas, things that must be done in order to fulfill the command, and it also carries with it things that are incidental. Some things would be violations of the command, but other things would just be incidental to it. Let's look at that for just a moment. Let's take Noah, the command to build the ark. Notice what God had. In that command we have included what? We have included the idea of the size. It is to be 300 cubits by 50 cubits by 30 cubits. Now, that's included. What would be a violation? A violation would be, well, first of all, not to build, because God said to build, but secondly, to use other dimensions, to build it of another size. But what would be included in it and yet not specified? We get to choose. Well, included in it would be tools. What kind of tools would you use? I might use a power saw if I had access to electricity. You might say, no, I prefer the good old-fashioned hand saw. Well, either one's all right, because God just said build the ark. He gave the dimensions. He wanted His dimensions followed, but He didn't really tell us what kind of tools should be used. Furthermore, God said use gopher wood. Now, honestly, I don't know what gopher wood is. There's some speculation about it. But what would be a violation of that? Well, you can't use pine and you can't use oak, unless one of those happens to be gopher wood. But you have to use gopher wood. Can't use any other kind of wood. But what would be incidental? Included, but incidental to it. Well, what size tree are you going to use? That would be incidental. It's included. Obviously, you need trees. But what size? Well, the law doesn't tell us. Put a door in the side. Now, what's a violation of that? Well, you could put no door. That would be a problem. How are you going to get in? Or you could put in the end instead of the side. That would be a violation. What would be included, though? What would be included would be the size of the door. God did not specify in His command what He wanted. You see the idea here. We could go on down. We talk about other matters. For instance, there was to be a window. But which side was the window to be on? North, east, south, west? We don't know. You're to make rooms, but He didn't say how many rooms were to be made. There was to be pitch. You couldn't go without pitch, but how hot are you going to heat it up? That would be your choice, not God's choice. It's to have 3 stories. Could you just put one? No, that wouldn't work. So we have a law which includes certain things. Some things are excluded, therefore violations. Other things are included by choice, or the choice of the person carrying out the law. You got a similar instance, if you would, with the command to go into all the world and preach the gospel. Notice God says go in Mark 16. What would be a violation? Not going. Some Christians have a problem with that. Some Christians are not going, and thereby they're violating this command. But then included in it as our choice would be direction. What direction would you go? Well, that's up to you. That's incidentally included here. What else is included in this? Specifically, into all the world. So we'll go all world. All the world. What would be a violation? Only part of the world. What is up to us to be included by our choice? Well, where are we going to start? Where begin is up to us. Probably we're going to start where we are. But you see how that works. And we need to recognize that principle in any command that we look at. We need to understand that we've got to choose from what God has given us. That there is a law, it includes certain things, other things are a violation, and then there are incidentals that are up to us. They're included, certainly, but it's by our choice. If we really want to understand God's will for our lives, we've got to open up the pages of the Bible. We've got to look within it and find what God has specified for us to do, what His command includes, and therefore what it would not include, and would thereby be a violation. We should avoid the violations and then make the choices necessary to carry out the will of God. Clearly, God has left some things open to us. Those things we get to choose. Other things are already specified. We must stay within His will.